So I'm glad you made it back to the last segment video on this custom Mr. Freeze. And yes, you did see correctly, there is a second portrait and now there is a custom helmet. Well, actually I robbed it from another figure and then I customized it to fit the body. So the next part of this segment is the dry brushing on the blaster. And if you've seen a lot of the Warhammer figure customizing and painting of the actual weapons, well, you've got an idea what I'm about to do. It's going to be a lot of dry brushing. I want it to look like a blaster that is used for freeze rays. So I'm going to use a lot of blues, a lot of white, and this is going to give us the appearance that it's been through a lot of wear and tear using it as a freeze blaster. So I'm going to start off with the lighter blues. I am using craft paints because I want them to dry flat, because I'll have to anyway cover it with a Mr. Super Clear that also dries flat. I don't want any bright highlights on here until I actually decide which ones I want to be glossy or glowing. In this case here, I'm using a sponge to wipe away any of the excess. I'm trying to get into all the recesses, and then I just want to keep a appearance of the metal covering those highlighted areas. In this case, this may be considered a area of the gun that glows as it heats or it's being used, and I'm going to put that also into the bottom. I'm using a larger brush to do a little bit better of a cleanup than just the sponge that I'm using to wipe off. I'll later use that large brush to apply a very thin layer of white all over the gun as if it were frosted. So depending on what brushes you use, you can get into these little details. Now if you do go over the edges like on this, because it is recessed, it's easy to clean by using another brush or by using the sponge or another material that you may have. But if it rubs over the area like you see here, don't worry about it. It just adds to the value that it's been through a lot of wear and tear. Now in the end, I ended up using a acrylic resin to cover those areas to give it more of an appearance of a bright highlight. But I'll let you watch the rest of the video because a lot of it is pretty self-explanatory, since it is a repeat as far as the technique that I've used in a lot of the other figures, which is basically just dry brushing. Here is our completed piece. All of the blues that I want here are the areas that would either glow or significantly show that it's in use. And you see a lot of the white that's over the texture areas that I applied with the larger brush in a dry brush technique, obviously. And then I'll go over just a bit more on the edges to show significant more wear. Now the browns that you see there are rust areas, same thing, it's dry brush. Obviously I added with a different color. Now moving on to the gun or the blaster, I want it to light up. So I've taken an old microphone cord and I've stripped it of the wire that's inside so I can replace it with the LED diode that I want in there. I drilled all the way through until I could get to the other side and then push in the wire, and I set it where I needed it, and I gave it a little test run to make sure it works. This glows white. I actually want it to go blue, so I'm gonna have to cut a small gel filter to fit in there and just kind of cram it in there. Then I'll set it into the area that I want the distance from the end of the barrel, and I am going to use the liquid resin to glue it in there. Once I have it in the spot that I need, I'm just going to go ahead and fill it with the liquid resin, and the liquid resin will act as a lens for that LED diode to transmit that light. So here it is. You saw that little blue gel pop out. This is what I want to change the color with, because I don't have an LED that's in a blue. I'm just going to change the color myself by using this small transparent cellophane. And it works pretty well. I like it. It's too bad that the gun is so heavy on the hand. Any case, let's move on. So now that we got it working, now we are going to set it in place. And as you can see, I've recessed it inside the nozzle or the barrel. And now I'm going to put it in place using the liquid resin and using the UV light. So just a tiny little drop just to soak it in there, get into the edges. Now I'm using the UV light to hold it in place. And it's not going to take a whole lot. So once it's set in place, then I'm going to fill it in, and of course using that UV resin, and then I am going to add that blue filter that I cut earlier and put inside to change the color of the LED. Once again, I don't have a blue LED, but I want it to glow in blue with the white coming also from that same barrel. So it just takes a few seconds for it to harden, and then we can proceed forward and add that gel inside the barrel. Now it's nice and secure. So we're going to take our tweezers, pop it in there, and it's a tight fit, so it just takes a while to push it into the barrel and make it fit. If I had a blue one, it would have been so much easier. I wouldn't have to do this, but I'm working with what I got. I didn't want to have to order another material and then wait in the mail and pay shipping, etc. So I'm going to work with what I've got. So once it's in here, I'm going to then cover this with the UV resin and harden it the same way. And by putting it on top of this, it'll create a lens, and it's going to just amplify the amount of light that's coming from this barrel. So I'll give you a closer look at what it looks like. The tweezers didn't really do the job, so I used a small screwdriver. Let's plug it in to do a little test, and there it is. It's working. It's changing the color. Awesome. I like it. So let's go ahead and fill this up with resin now. It's ready to go. It doesn't take a whole lot. It's going to be a drop to fill in the gap, and then probably another drop to bring it to the edge of the barrel that you see there. So there's 2 drops. Let's go with 1 more. And let's harden this first to produce a layer. Like I said, it doesn't take very long because it's very thin. The thicker it is, the longer it takes, but in this case it's a very, very small amount. And here's our next drop. And this should spill over to the edges. Well, okay, great. It took 4 drops. So let's go ahead and cure this in there. And now it creates a lens. And once it's dry, it's gonna look awesome. So this worked out pretty good. It looks better than I thought. Let's run it with the light on while it's hardening here. It's good. I like it. It's gonna work for what I need. So let me show you what I have already done to the figure as far as the lighting and where it's coming from. Now we know it's coming from the pack. I drilled all the way through from one end to the other, and then I added this old microphone cord that I stripped the wire out of, and I ran it all the way through, added the diode inside it. I didn't have to glue the actual tube because it actually concealed itself once it goes back into place, so I didn't have to glue anything. But I did glue it into the backpack because I don't want it to fall out and pull that LED cable. Those cables are so thin and they're really, really delicate. I've already torn 2. So this one is going to be adfixed with super glue. So this is what he looks like all set up. Yeah, and now we got to work on that face. But I really like the way it's coming out. So let's move on. There's the next step to go through, and this is going to be now working on the head. Now that we've got the tube in place, we've got the backpack taken care of, and actually I'm going to show you how I got to that on the backpack. The texture that's on the back, it looks pretty cool. The texture on the shoulders, I've got something else planned for that. I'll show that in a different segment, probably another video, because there's just still so much to show on here. So you can see the head I've already painted. It's already in its blue tone, and I've got the details painted in as well. I even give it the eyebrows. I'd probably go without the eyebrows though, because it really doesn't really add that much to it. But this is how I did it. Little airbrushing, little Vallejo primer And the thing with the Vallejo primer, it's not obviously the same as the Tester's primer. It doesn't dry flat and it doesn't dry as quick. So I do have to use the hair dryer for this to dry to the point that I can actually work on it. It also dries very sticky and it takes a lot longer to dry with the air in the environment. So you do have to speed up the process if you want to work on it. In this case, I've been leaving it over a few hours because I want the primer to adhere to the surface so I can actually work on it without rubbing it off while I'm working on it. And in this case, it takes just a few layers, 3 or 4 layers. It looks like I missed a few spots there. And then I'll just go back in and hand paint the rest of it. I'll be using a blue, dark blue from the bottom to cause a shadow, which is what I did here. And now I'm going to spray from the top with a highlight, a lighter blue. And then I'm going to go in and with a fine tip brush paint in the recesses. And this is what you end up with. There's really only 3 layers of blue, or tones of blue. And then of course the yellow on the teeth, and then you've got the red on the tongue, and of course then you've got the off-white on the whites of the eyes, or then the blue pupil, and then the black eyebrows. It's just really hard to show you that because everything is so tiny and the camera can only get up so close, and I have got all that equipment in front of my face. But as I said, there is a second portrait, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So let's move on to what the actual figure looks like. This is it. It's looking pretty good. I like where it's going. And yes, I did fix those gaps in the belt toward the end of the video. I ran out of the silver paint, so I actually used a lilac to cover it up after I used some more putty. Now you can see that I've got plenty of space to add a helmet. Now it took me a while to find the helmet that I needed. In the end, you're going to recognize what helmet it is, but I'll tell you now what it is. I used the helmet from the 30th anniversary NECA figures from the Aliens movie. Here it is. It looks pretty cool. I honestly don't know where that blue dot's coming from, but anyway, I just want you to see the figure and how it turned out with all the lights. Again, I haven't hooked up to a USB connection. For what reason? I don't like opening things to switch out batteries, and I don't like buying batteries. So by doing this, I can plug it into an external source and let it run for hours. Now here's the goggles that I worked up earlier, and that's a piece of Warblood which just becomes the headband, and it worked out really well for this. And I was afraid it wasn't going to work on the second portrait, but it does. Now up close you see all the nasty details, but at arm's length it looks pretty good. Here it is again with before I painted the portrait, and now you've already seen it with the painted portrait. So let's move on to the backpack, because I was going to show you how I got that rustic look on the back of it. I ended up using tape to cover the areas I wanted stripes, and then I ended up using liquid mask with a small brush and creating these little droplets all over the areas that are going to be painted. So as you can see, I'm putting them on these silver areas, not necessarily on the blue tape. I'm overlapping onto the blue tape because as I peel it, I want it to rip part of it off. So as soon as it's dry, then I'm going to go over it with the base color that I want. You can use yellow, you can use green, you can use red, whatever color you want to use. So I'm going to go with the yellow to start off with. And again, we're going to be going in layers because the yellow is more translucent, so it's going to take a few more coats for it to build up. Besides, it's acrylic. You can't do it all in one pass. But the fact that we're using an airbrush makes it so much easier. It would be so much difficult to do that with a hand brush. So if you have an opportunity to pick up an airbrush, even an inexpensive one that is self-propelled for 60 bucks, it really makes your work all that much better. So once again, once this is dry, we'll come up with another layer to build it up. And now we are going to then pull away the tape to show you what it looks like. So it takes a few layers, it takes a few minutes to do so because you don't want any runs. You want those droplets that you added in there to be able to move away when you rub them. It's kind of like a rubber cement in the end. You can actually rub it with your hand. If you want, you can use actually an eraser and it can come off. But in this case, we're just gonna peel away the tape that has the stripes and then rub it with our hand or with an actual eraser. So let me show you how this looks like. Let's get rid of all this tape. And let's pull away some of these stripes that are overlapped with some of the rubber liquid mask, and see how it pulls away at the edges, leaving a jagged edge. And same thing on this side, and same thing here. Pretty cool. But if something is missing. Now, if this is as far as you want to go, that's fine. No big deal. It's all up to the design that you want to have showing in your final product. I'm going to add another color. And I think red would be ideal, just to add some contrast. But this looks pretty cool. I like the fact that the idea worked. And check it out. There's no marks on here from that glue, or I should say the liquid mask. So now let's retape the areas. And now we are going to use red. Okay, so as you can see, we pretty much just repeated the taping process, but now we taped over the yellow areas and repeating the liquid mask droplets over the areas that we are going to paint, which are going to be the red. So periodically, make sure your airbrush tip is clean so you can spray evenly and cleanly. Again, it is an acrylic, so it's going to take a few layers, so control the amount of paint. You don't want any runs. You're going to have the tape create the hard lines, so don't worry about spraying over onto the tape. It's going to create a much better looking product. So once again, go with layers. Let the air from the brush help you dry it. And then go back over some of the areas. If you want to change the tone, you can go with a darker red and spray it into the corners or on the edges or in the center or on the bottom. If you want to create some shadow, this is a good opportunity to do so. Again, wait for it to dry and let's pull off the tape. And now you're going to see the contrast with the yellow and the red. It looks very, very significant. And because we added those droplets of liquid mask, that is going to provide for that extra look of the wear and tear. So there you go. It's looking to be pretty cool. And there it is. Automatically it pulls away. Yeah. So the ones that didn't come off, you can clean them off with your knife or rub them with your hand. And it's going to leave you a blank area over that paint. That's pretty cool. I like it. So that gives you an idea. You don't have to use it on this only. There's so many other articles of these action figures that can make use of this kind of a technique. And it's something that you probably already have in your arsenal. So take a look. There's our wear and tear on the backpack. I like it. However, I'm not done with it. Let's go a step further. So before moving on, I went ahead and decided to add some shadowing or some wear and tear as far as maybe exhaust, and showing some areas where would be darker from exhaust use. So on these air vents, I went ahead and added some black in very thin layers, and then underneath the actual pack or this cover that I just painted, I added some shadowing to show some wear and tear as far as being dirty, etc. Anything else that you need to add now would be perfect, because once you put it together, it's going to be difficult to manipulate it. But this is what I did to mine. So I'm going to test it out and see how it looks on the body. See if it matches the result that I'm trying to envision. And there we go. That looks pretty cool. I like it. It's going to work. You can see I still have it in two parts. I haven't added the top part and I haven't added my wires on the inside. But there's one more thing I want to add, and I want to add some droplets of frost or ice or condensation, better said. So I took that same brush that I used the liquid mask and I added droplets of UV resin randomly all over in different sizes. And this this is something that I wanted to do earlier, and just to add some texture on top of what I've already done. So then I'm going to cure it with the UV light. It's going to harden, obviously, and it's going to be transparent. At this point, it just looks like tiny little droplets and lenses all over it. And that's cool. It looks okay. But we're not through yet. So let me finish off just these few drops, and I'll show you what I did with the droplets. So I'm going to hit it with the UV light first because it's definitely needed to harden these before doing anything else, any painting, any sanding, whatever. This is what it looks like up close. So just pretend that it's condensation, he's gone through temperatures, and the ice will melt and the water will condense upon whatever surface it is. And because it is so thin, it's gonna harden very quickly. And I like the way it looks so far. It looks pretty cool. So the next step that I went ahead and did here is I decided to add some texture using white paint. And I ended up spraying it at an angle. And an angle from the top, 45-degree angle, to show that there's ice coming from one direction, but not from underneath, because the vents would be the areas of heat, and it would be obviously not allowing the ice to form at the bottom. So I mixed in a little bit of white, just enough to cover what I need. I don't need a whole lot, just a few drops. But let me show you what it looks like. If you angle it at just the right angle, 45 degrees coming from this side, and you just lightly spray, then you can create an effect of frost. Now there are other products that can actually help you do this, but I just worked with what I've got. So you want to go lightly, you don't want to cover it, you still want to see the work underneath. And that just depends how much you want to cover. For me, this was working just fine. I liked the way it looked. Let's put this thing together and see what it looks like before we put it onto the body. And yeah, that looks pretty slick. I do like it. It works out just fine. So now let's put it into the process of adding the wires. I've already done a lot of it here. This is our circuit board that takes the power into the lights that are going to be steady, and then the little square one, that's our effects board that's going to create the flickering. And there's a few lights that obviously are flickering, one on the front, the one on the gun, and the two lights that are in the exhaust ports, jet ports that are in the back. Now, I did promise you a second portrait. This is it, a stoic look. It is the same character. This is the Punisher head from one of the Mezco figures, and is a custom printed resin head, same as the other, except it doesn't have the mouth open. So the same process. Let's cover it with primer. Let's make sure the primer is dry before we move on. I've got 4 layers of primer on here. And as you can tell, I did sand down the hair. I don't want the texture of the hair. I want it to be bald. Now, up close, you do see some small lines of hair texture that are in there. That's because of the camera is so close up on it. At arm's length, you can't even tell what's there, especially after you do all the painting and add the highlights and shadows. It's not going to be noticeable unless you put your face on it. So pretend that they're not there at this point. So let's move on and let's paint the rest of the figure and show you again what blue tones I ended up using to create this. And then this time, I didn't add the black eyebrows just because I wanted a different look. Besides, with the goggles, you don't even see it. And the cool thing is that the goggles do transfer to this portrait, and I'm glad it did because it's actually the same character. So I didn't have to modify anything on the goggles. Again, I'm using a craft paint, using the blue, adding a little white to create the base paint, and this is what it's gonna look like. A light blue skin tone to start with. Now once again, you can hand paint these with just a brush. You'll have to really thin down the paint so that it does not get too thick on you. The thicker the paint, the more details it hides. That's why I do recommend that you pick up an inexpensive airbrush so that you can have thin layers of paint so you don't block out the details of your figure. You block out those details, it's going to be really difficult to come back in and do any painting on the eyes or the brow or the areas around the eyes themselves. So just be careful how thick of paint you end up applying. So we're going to add maybe a light dark wash to the face itself to give it different splotches of tone. Since not everybody has an even skin tone, there's splotches everywhere on our faces. And let's put in our light blue tone. As you can see, the camera doesn't really pick it up here. It actually is a little bit darker than this. Just build up the color, 3 or 4 layers until you have an even tone all over the face. Now, once that's finished, then we're going to come back with our blue tone from underneath to create those shadows. We're not going to put it on directly onto the face or frontal. We're going to go at an angle underneath, just like we did with the backpack. So take a look. Now it's a darker blue, and this is what it looks like. Here's a little test there. Throw it at an angle, and now take a look. It's going to create shadows with very minimal effort. There you go. Did you see that? It looks pretty cool. There's your shadows. Not a whole lot of work, but it really makes a bigger impact. Now if you go over a little too far, you can wipe it away with the brush or with a sponge. If you add too much like I did here at the top, just go at an angle from the top to the bottom, and that's it. Boom, you're set. So now we're going to go ahead and add some highlights, and now we can use our hand brush to go back into a lighter blue and come in from the top. I'm going to use a white to add some even brighter highlights onto the brow, the cheekbone, the nose, all of the raised areas that would be exposed further from the rest of the face. And this is what it looks like. Very, very lightly. Not a whole lot of paint on this dry brush. It's, again, that's going to depend on your design and your look, but keep it wet, keep it just loaded enough for you to add the paint, and if you had to, you can blend it in with the same brush. That's it. Not a whole lot. Take a look. It makes a big difference at arm's length. And there it is with the eyes painted, pupils in the dots, the lips painted, and it's been clear coated. The blue that's here doesn't really show accurately. It looks a lot different in person. But there's our two heads, stoic head and an angry head. And now you do see here the helmet that I've attached, well, the back of the helmet. Like I said before, this is from the NECA series, the 30th anniversary Aliens action figure line. I ended up cutting the helmet because it did not fit exact on here. This is what it is on the right side. This is the helmet. It comes in a gold. I chose this one because it's got the cutouts already there in the back, and it's got the dome. And it's 2 pieces, so when I put them together, it's going to snap in place perfect. Now the white putty there, as you can see here, I just filled in some gaps with the putty because I couldn't get it to seat exactly. So I did the best I could by cutting it by hand, then I super glued it in, then I matched it up, and then I fit the piece with the UV resin so it attaches in the front there. And then I filled in the tiny little gaps with the putty so that it doesn't have light leaks. Now the second reason why I chose this helmet, here it is now painted with a silver and a black wash, is because it doesn't interfere with the lights that I already installed inside the collar. So when I bring up the lights, I'm still going to have lights on his face, and it's going to light the inside of the helmet. It looks so cool. I was so happy with it. And the fact that it actually has room for those goggles I made. Although the goggles I'm not going too crazy about right now because it doesn't look as great as I thought, but it works. It's going to work for now. I kind of like the look without the goggles, but take a look at what it's going to look like all lit up. Let me show you. an idea of what it's going to look like on the shelf with a little bit more dramatic lighting. It's just 2 spotlights, but take a look at the helmet. It's bright enough that I can have like a silhouette on his face. Got some highlights on the edges. It lights it in blue on the inside, just the actual helmet area. And this is the back of the jetpack, the ice pack, I guess. And there's your blaster. It's working. I'm pretty happy with it. Here's the head coming off, and let's swap out with the second head as I promised. Ooh, I'm liking this. This is cool. Even without the eyebrows painted, it looks really, really different, and it looks really, really cool. So I attached the goggles face first and then the headband over the back. If I did it the other way, I would have more difficulty and probably end up breaking the headband. So that's what he looks like, and let me get this seated right. I didn't seat it down correctly, but anyway, you've got the idea. It's gonna look pretty cool on the shelf. This is what he looks like with the different lighting. It's different. So I'm gonna leave you now because I've got to work on another project. I hope that you liked the video and you picked up a few techniques. If you do like it, comment, subscribe, and of course share it. In the meantime, keep customizing and enjoy the rest of this segment of the actual product.